Well, we are in 2 Samuel chapter 11, and the plan is to finish the chapter because I think 4 parts is enough. But this is like a huge chapter, right? This really matters a lot. And it shows us in many ways that the steps of sinful selfishness is very slippery. You always say, no, when you step on icy steps, suddenly your feet give out from underneath you, sending you down them at a rapid pace, and you fall and you break your back or you just hurt yourself. Ouch. Selfishness is like that. And of course, in the recent news, we know of the 2 Tennessee brothers, right, who stockpiled 17,700 bottles of hand sanitizer. And I love that his shirt says family man, family business on there. And then they tried to gouge the prices on it and were charging 10 times their value, which again, you're like, hey, it's okay. They went and bought it and they're going to make some money. But of course, if you think of all the people who were fearful and couldn't get anything, you're like, this selfishness wasn't just a harmless crime. And of course, people stepped in and kept them from being able to make the profit that they wanted. But A.W. Tozer, the great theologian and overall pastor, wise man, wrote, "The widest thing in the universe is not space. It is the potential capacity of the human heart. Being made in the image of God, it is capable of almost unlimited extension in all directions. And one of the world's worst tragedies is that we allow our hearts to shrink until there is room in them for little beside ourselves." Isn't that a reflection of what we see in the world? Like, people are capable of great good and horrible evil. People are capable of love for others and a shrinking heart that only cares for themselves. And this is exactly what happened to David in 2 Samuel 11, right? So, quick review. This is David's 6 steps towards trying to get away with murder. And we're learning from this how we should stop along the way before we get to murder. Because David fell down this path, we could as easily. So remember, started off with David neglecting his duty. Instead of being on the battlefield as he should have, serving the Lord, he was resting at home, being negligent of his time. Then David was up on the roof of his palace when just getting up from bed when he should have been getting to work, and he indulged his eyes, gazing at a woman beneath. And he looked, and he looked, and he lusted. And then he didn't just lust in his mind, he went and betrayed the marriage covenant by asking who she was, finding out she was a married woman, and a woman married to one of his faithful soldiers, and he took her. He took her. Then not only does he take her, committing adultery with her, he then tries to hide his sin. He tried to hide his sin, verses 5-13. He could have just stopped. He could have confessed when he had the thought. He could have confessed after he did the act, but no, he didn't want forgiveness. He wanted to hide it. And so he walked and tries to control this final step when he could not hide his sin. He found that Uriah, was more righteous than he was. And he tried to tempt Uriah wouldn't give in. And so David goes ahead and murders to hide his initial sin. This is the 5th step along this path towards murder. Achieving the murder, he goes and murders to hide his sin. This is verses 14 through 25. And we're going to start off beginning is David murders to keep his secret. This is his plan C. Plan A didn't work. Plan B didn't work. Plan C is I'm going to kill this guy to keep my sin a secret. Verses 14 through 17. Just go ahead and read along with me. In the morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, "Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die." And Joab was besieging the city. He assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. And the men of that city came out, and they fought with Joab. And some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite also died. Then Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting. And he instructed the messenger, "When you have finished telling all the news about the fighting of the king, then, if the king's anger arises, and if he says to you, 'Why did you go so near to the city? Did you not know that you would shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth? Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall, so that he died at Thebes? Why did you go near the wall?' Then you shall say, 'Your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also.'" So David murders to keep his secret. And he starts off with a letter, right? There's a letter gets sent out. And what time is he writing this letter? Look down in verse 14.
In the morning.
Morning. Can you look right beforehand in the verses? What was he doing the entire night beforehand? Trying to get Uriah drunk. And did it work?
Yes.
Yes.
But he didn't go there.
Yeah, exactly. He was able to get him drunk, but he couldn't control Uriah. Even intoxicated, Uriah was going to be a righteous man. And David goes into, okay, new plan. Like, I can imagine, this is a little bit of sanctified imagination, right? Think of David, he finds out Uriah is still at the city gates, and he cannot sleep at all the rest of the night. His mind is twirling as he tries to figure out, how can I make this go away? How can I hide my sin? And finally, the plan becomes clear. I'll have Uriah killed, and I'll marry his wife. That'll make it go away. And he's like, how do I do that? And he's like, here we go. In war. He's going to go back. I can make sure he dies. This is probably the greatest treachery of David, because he doesn't just write a letter furiously in the morning. He then sends it by the hand of Uriah. He gives the letter to Uriah, and Uriah takes back his death warrant, being completely unaware of at least its contents, if he was aware of anything else. Verse 15 explains his simple plan. Set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, that he may be struck down and die. Pretty simple. Joab, I want you to send him into a desperate fighting situation, and then pull back so that he attacks, or he is attacked, and he dies. And it's interesting, the word turn back is the same Hebrew word as repent. It means to turn around from, do 180s. You can imagine David's describing, saying, you all run straight towards battle with Uriah, and then everyone stop and run backwards, except for Uriah. But David's a great military strategist, is he not? But there's got to be easier ways to kill Uriah, right? Well, what could be an easier way to kill Uriah? Executions. Yeah, just have him go up, stab him with a sword, okay? Yeah? Why doesn't he do that, though? He has the power to, but
Because then it's too overt.
then it's too overt.
Yeah, you're right. I didn't do anything.
Exactly. People are going to start to question. So he wants it to be secret. But think about this, okay? So he commands, and he says, send him and then draw back. So if you wanted to keep it a secret, how do you send out an army and then have everyone in the army draw back except the one guy you want to die without causing suspicion, right? Is there some problems here? How many people would have to know for this plan to work? Again, I think it's, we've seen already David is a great military strategist. He's no idiot. I think this is revealing a little bit of his rush. He is desperate, trying to hide it. And he's like, hey, make this work, okay? Joab, make it work. It's the deceitfulness of his own sins taking over. He's not even thinking like the general he is. So Joab then receives the order and approaches the city, right? Says, Joab was besieging the city, and he signed Uriah to the place where he knew there were valiant men. So David says, Uriah, go ahead and kill him. And we have to ask this question, why does Joab say yes? Why, Joab? Why are you going along with this? Because if you go back to chapter 3, let's remember the character of Joab. Right? Joab chapter 3, verse 24, 25. Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it that you have sent him away so that he is gone? You know that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you. And you know you are going out and you're coming in, and you know all that you are doing. And of course, we'll get there in the time of the census. David tells him to take a census, and he says, David, don't do this thing. So does Joab seem like someone who would blindly follow orders? I don't think so. So why does he go along with this? Because do you remember Abner's murder? How Joab killed him in cold blood? And if you also recall, David publicly shamed him of saying how great Abner was. So Pastor Richard Phillips, writing about this, says, I love this quote, we can only imagine the grim satisfaction that Joab felt when Uriah delivered the sealed message. He knew that David would never again lord it over him in righteousness. Oh, there we go. Kind of jumps a little bit there. Sorry about that. Joab had incurred David's wrath over the murder of Abner when the leader of the northern tribes had tried to sue for peace. David had shamed Joab for that sin, cursing his nephew publicly and causing him to trudge mournfully before Abner's casket during the state funeral, verse 31. But the next time these two men met, Joab knew exactly how he would look David in the eye. Again, not crystal clear, the text doesn't say his motivation, but that fits the puzzles together pretty well, doesn't it? Here he is. David, you mocked me for murdering out of anger so much, and now you're asking me to as well. Okay, I'll do this, David. They come and they're besieging the city, surrounding it, starving out the people within. Now, key thing is you have to understand, when a city was besieged, they had no need to go near it, because what happens to all the food if the people are stuck, unable to bring new supplies in? And what happens when people run out of food and water? They start starving. Do starving people fight well? No. So the whole idea is cities were designed to repulse attack. They have large walls, ramparts. This is an ancient drawing of people attacking a city and having to work against it. And they would just defend it. They would throw down boulders, they would throw down arrows, spears, whatever they could do, pouring hot liquids over. Think of a castle. That idea has been around for centuries, right? And so the goal in a siege was to wait. If you had them surrounded, you just been patient enough. So again, it's very unlikely Joab would have any reason to approach the wall and to get into danger. But Joab's not trying to get into the city, is he? He is trying to find the best defense, the strongest place, and attack. And so that's exactly what they do. They attack the city, right? They head straight on up to a part that they know is a strongly defended area. They engage in battle, and then we find out the soldiers counterattack. go to verse 23. We get a little more detail from the messenger's report. It says, Joab and all the army that was with him came. I'm in the wrong chapter. Verse 23. Then the messenger said to David, the men gained an advantage over us and came out against us in the field. So they go against the city. It starts to become a little bit of a dicey battle. Israelites run away, and as you see the purple arrow up there, the soldiers come out of the city, chasing them into the open field. Right? Whatever the idea was, it brought them out. And it was very common in those days. You attack like city gates directly, and then people could actually, you would try and get in the city gates, but then they could come out the city gates. Whatever happened, they had a strong attack. Weapons like this were later used. It's just a cool image. These are siege tanks. Israel didn't have these yet. This is the idea. You come in, you drive into the city, you try and smash it down. Whatever happened, it kind of worked until Israel pushes them back, and they push back up to the city gate. And then, again, verse 23, we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. Verse 24, then the archers shot at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So they push back all the way to the city gate, way too close, and the archers attack, and the archers kill Uriah. It's a clear idea in military history. You don't get too close to the gates, because when you have the gates, the people on the walls have the high ground. High ground is the advantage. See, David's covering of his sin doesn't just hurt Bathsheba. It doesn't just hurt Uriah. And look at verse 24. Who else died? More soldiers died. See, covering sin, you think about this, you guys know, temperature's up, right? One thing I love when it's nice, warm temperature, drink an ice cold Coke. But I keep forgetting to put the Coke in the fridge. So what do I have to do? A lot of ice, right, to cool it down. Problem with an icy drink is all the perspiration comes off it, right? And it just drips and drips and gets all over the place. And the worst part about it is if you try, is like you pick up your cup and there's a little ring right there, and you put it back down and you try and like scoot the water away with the cup, and all it does is spread it further, right? And that's that same idea. When we try and cover our sin with more sin, all we do is spread it further, and it gets onto other people, and it makes a mess. See, this is the sad truth about sin. Sin that is not repented of becomes sin we approve. And people want others to approve their sin as well. When we start approving of sin and excusing sin, then not only that, we start wanting others to back up our approval. It's crazy. It's like the Bible knows how people are going to be. The Bible predicts what's going to happen in the world. Because do you guys remember when homosexuality was just between two people, what they do in the privacy of their own room? And they would say, hey, if you don't like a gay marriage, then don't get a gay marriage, right? How has that stayed around? Is that still the mentality? No, it's like you have to not just be okay with it, you have to celebrate it. Or confession sometimes works this way too. Let's be honest, that's just not outside the church. In the church, sometimes we find people, and we tell them what we're struggling with in our lives, knowing that they will not get on our backs about it. They won't really get upset with us. They won't really make it hard for us. We just want to leave it just enough so they'll be like, oh, it's okay. Romans 1:32 warns us about this. He says, they know God's righteous decree that those who practice such things deserve to die, but they not only do them, but they give approval to those who practice them. It's bad enough doing the sin, but to give approval of the sin as well. David is a great example that we have to beware of how we let our sins roll down, because they will bring other people in them. We will make them accomplices in our sin. No one decides one day, I'm just going to have an affair. No one decides one day, I'm just going to steal from my company. But if we neglect our duties, we gratify our eyes, we indulge our fantasies, we fail to flee temptation, we may end up there, and we bring others along with us. So much could have been stopped if David had just repented earlier. Now, David ordered this murder, and the report now must go to David. So we had David murders, and then David's response to the report shows no repentance. David's response to this report shows he has no repentant heart. He's not even sorry about it. It starts off with Joab preparing the message. In verses 18 through 21, Joab gives this message, the messenger a message. I'll read it again. Joab sent and told David all the news about the fighting. And he instructed the messenger, when you finish telling all the news about the fighting to the king, then, if the king's anger rises, and if he says to you, why did you go so near the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Abimelech, the son of Jerubbesheth? Did not a woman cast an upper millstone on him from the wall so that he died at Thebez? Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. So Joab doesn't just give the messenger the news, he also gives him how to give the king the news. He's like, well, here's some if. If this happens, if the king gets really angry, then here's what you should say. And you go, well, why? Why does he have to say the king might be angry? Two reasons. One, who was supposed to die? Uriah only. Who did die? Uriah and others. So Joab saw, probably, again, the text didn't say it, but I'm assuming. Joab saw David's plan and goes, that's not workable. How are you going to make me keep that a secret? I don't want to die and have my men turn on me for killing one of our own either. How do I make this a secret? A few more men are going to have to die to make this happen, right? So he does this, he comes up, but this also needs to have an excuse because it was just a bad plan. It was just plain and clearly a bad plan because they should not have gone near the wall, right? Here they are with lots of gaps, and what happens if you go near the wall? You get attacked. And right now, Job is basically having this conversation with himself, where he's anticipating David's words and the lecture he's going to get from David, because this is historical. You know, you're in the army. If you don't learn military history, what's going to happen to you?
You just keep following the same tactics and tricks. You get demoted this year.
Yeah, and you definitely. And I'm sure there's a one sense where even Joab's probably thinking that. He's like, I don't want David to think that I should get demoted over this. Or killed.
Yeah, the soldiers.
Yeah. Because we have Abimelech. Abimelech was the son of Gideon in Judges 9. And this famous military story that Israel knew. Like David and Israel's treated everything else that came in the Bible before them as real history. The Bible always treats itself as real history. So Abimelech, after Gideon dies, decides to go and kill all his brothers and sisters. He kills his whole family, and he's the only one, and he makes himself king over Israel. But that doesn't last very long, because he only reigns about 3 years, until in Judges 9:22, Gaal, the son of Ebed, rises up against him. So he takes this big army, follows that orange line, down to the city of Shechem and proceeds to defeat them easily. But this causes some other uproar in other cities, and they start rebelling against him. And he goes to the city of Thebes, a little bit to the north east. And there, as everyone gathered into the tower of Thebes and tried to fight off, he comes up against the city to defeat them, to burn them down. And a woman, famously, takes a large millstone, throws it over the edge, and crushes his skull. You know, he's close to death, and in near death, and he actually asks his soldiers, "Kill me with your sword, so I may not be known as the man who was killed by a woman." But what is he known by? The man who was killed by a woman with a millstone. Right?
She's very strong.
I know. Doesn't she look mighty? That is a mighty woman up there.
That's like
I know.
100.
Hey, you know what? Her child was probably in the tower with you, and she had that adrenaline rush that allowed women to pick up cars, right?
I was going to take away from her.
Come on, Yuri, come on.
She was probably a lot bigger than that.
Dead.
Well, it depends on the size. So there's all kinds of millstones. Could be all kinds of size. It could be, you know, small like this or big like that. They're used for grinding. So it depends on which part of the mill it came from. But I'll take the pictures for you, right?
These retaining wall blocks that are this big weigh 60 pounds.
Yeah. To get over the head like that.
Yeah.
I'm just saying she's probably bigger.
Or the artistic license is stretched a little bit, maybe. Maybe.
Well,
Yeah. The point that Job's making is like, if David lectures me about military history, right? You know, we know this is the way. We know, like, don't let him threaten to demote me over this, because of course I've learned, right? It's, for example, you know, this is the danger thing. The most it's on the top 10 list of biggest military mistakes in the history of the Western world is Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's failed invasion of Soviet Union in 1941. For two reasons. One, she had opened up the second front, which almost defeated Germany in World War I. And two, who was the other guy who tried to invade the Soviet Union and failed? Napoleon. And he makes the exact same mistakes. Exactly the same. Those who fail history are doomed to repeat it. And so Uriah is very clever, where he says, you know, yeah, lives were lost. This plan was stupid. This cost us a lot, but you know what, David? Uriah was checked off. Your goal was met. So he's dead. It's all okay. After all this preparation, the messenger is sent back to Jerusalem. He takes the path, walks the 50 miles back to Jerusalem, reports to David, where David hears the messenger. Verse 22, 24. The messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent him to tell. The messenger said to David, the men gained an advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. Then the archers shot at your servants from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead also. As a dutiful messenger, he repeats the message back to the king as he was told. Verse 23, as we already saw, there's some specifics we didn't hear earlier, but he points them out. David's target has been taken out. The man he wanted is dead. It looks like a casualty of war. Now, it appears that the messenger never waited to see if David got angry. He just blurted out right away, Uriah is dead. Again, maybe people realize what's going on. Maybe he just shortened the message, but I think there's enough doubt in there to kind of seed our thoughts of going, maybe people know what's going on. But, you know, there's a question here. You know, maybe he was just afraid of how David would respond. Like, would David explode with rage because his general was incompetent? Would he be overcome with grief, the loss of all these men? Would he require the messenger to take a message of rebuke back against to Joab? But no. Verse 25, David just comforts the messenger. David said to the messenger, "Thus shall you say to Joab, do not let this matter displease you, for the sword devours one and another. Strengthen your attack against the city and overthrow it, and encourage him." This response seems really out of character to David, because as John Woodhouse states, David had a reputation for severe treatment towards certain persons who had thought they were bringing him good news that in fact judged to be bad news. People had come to him and said, "Oh, David, we've done this great thing," and he would have them killed because what they had done was unrighteous. David was very swift in his justice. But David speaks so calmly, right? So it's like, don't blame yourself. The word there, and if you look in the Bible, in our English, it says, "Do not let this matter displease you." The Hebrew is literally, "Don't let this be evil in your sight," which to Joab probably has a double meaning, right? He's not just saying, don't just let this incident be evil in your sight. He's like, don't let my command, don't think evil of me, of murder right now. And the excuses he lays out for his sin pile up here, right? David, it's like, Joab probably isn't happy about the fact that one of his key soldiers is dead. So he says, he might have just died anyway, right? He goes, the sword devours one now and another later. This happens. But the soldier shouldn't be killed by David's men, with David's strategy. Yes, more soldiers are dead. He's like, but war has costs, right? The sword devours here and there is hardly appropriate considering the loss of the troops that they have just engaged to obey David's order. He goes, you could just keep attacking the city because this won't stop God's work, right? We have to keep on doing God's work. But are they really doing God's work anymore? And of course, he says, just be encouraged. Be encouraged. But as we find out, this evil is never forgotten. See, the reaction to hide our sin is as old as Eden and as common as a kicking knee when it's tapped with a hammer. There's a sad story of a pastor who was caught in all kinds of sin. And his elder was on the phone with him saying, open his Bible, reading 1 Timothy 3, saying, you are not qualified to be a pastor anymore. The pastor's like, but don't you, this will hurt everything we've planned. This will destroy so many people's faith. And the man just goes, but this is what it says. And the pastor goes, no, but I mean, the defense against clear sin. What is normal is not right. And we want to hide what we do, which leads to only greater hurt. The reality is David is murdering right now. He is commanding murder through someone else, but it's murder nonetheless. And he's trying to make excuses for it. Maybe the only difference between you or I at times, especially when we get really fired up and angry from David, the only difference between us and David is that we fear the consequence of murder more than he did. He was the king. He could get away with it. We can't. But we also must remember Jesus really raises the stakes for us, does he not? Let's turn there quickly. Matthew 5. We should read it if we got it. Matthew chapter 5. Verse 21, 22. You have heard it was said of those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to counsel. And whoever says, you fool, will be liable to the hell of fire. Jesus' standard, it says, is not just going out and actually murdering someone. It's the anger in our heart we are guilty for. David's cover-up here shows how little he cared. This was David. No matter how a righteous man he was, he took a dark path. And no matter how righteous we are, we can become, we must beware that we don't make excuses for our sin. We must repent early. But David's finished the job, but he still has a hanging particle out there to deal with. The sixth step in this murder is the final cover-up. David tried to look good in an evil situation. Again, this might be the most diabolical part of the whole thing, I argue, is David now actually tries to look good as he does this evil. 26, 27. When the wife of Uriah heard that Uriah, her husband, was dead, she lamented over her husband. And when the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Narrator continues explaining what happened, and what does the Bible call her here? Wife of Uriah. Why might it call her the wife of Uriah and not her name Bathsheba? Could it be the whole point was she was a married woman, right? This once again driving this in. She was a married woman he committed adultery with, and he murdered her husband. So find Bathsheba mourns her husband. We can't say how genuine this is, but when Sarah died in Genesis 23:2, some point out and say that the text said Abraham mourned and wept for her. Here it just says mourn, but the narrator is the one who says this. She really did mourn. She cried, she wept. But in Israel, mourning wasn't just an act of sadness, it was a ritual. And so at least 7 days were expected for the dead, where you would mourn for them and weep and show your mourning through sackcloth, ashes, and sadness. She mourns for those 7 days, and after the 7 days, David weds her. And I think this actually would have looked really good to David for most people. Because you imagine, widows were in a very precarious situation. In a time where only the men worked, what would happen to a widow? What could happen to her?
Destitute.
Destitute. Yeah. You take advantage of. They had no means of providing for themselves. So God, in his wisdom, provided a system to take care of widows, right? It was called the Kinsman Redeemer. You guys remember any of this? This goes back to David's great-grandmother, Ruth. Remember Ruth, who was a widow? This daughter-in-law of a widow? And she said to Boaz, when she went into him, Ruth 3:9, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. But Boaz doesn't take and marry her right away. So remember, what does he have to do first?
Make sure it's okay with the other near relative.
Yeah, make sure there's near relative. So in the law, there was actually the nearest relative was required to marry. If they took the land, they got the benefit of the land, they were required to also marry the woman and to give a child for their dead brother or cousin. Boaz was a distant relative. So what he had to do was make sure it was okay with the near relative who was legally required to do that. So this was a common practice that while the family's duty was to care for the widow, a more wealthy benefactor could step in and help. David had basically married Abigail the same way. Her husband died, he came in, and it looked so kind. Here was this wealthy man who would care for this poor woman. David would assume the lifelong responsibility of caring for the needs of Uriah's widow, and he was obligated to father a child to raise up an offspring in his name. I say, for all parents, David would have looked great. He got away because he could have a child now with Bathsheba. Everyone would be like, "Aw, David's so good. He's giving a child for Bathsheba and Uriah." Most of the court would say he's a great man. David's got off scot-free. But Yahweh was displeased. End of the verse 27. The thing that David had done displeased the Lord. Very interesting that the narrator's closing words echo David's message to Joab in verse 25. It says, verse 25, again, the literal translation is, "Don't let this be evil in your eyes." And now it is evil in the Lord's eyes. The one person he knows for sure is aware of what happened. He begs forgiveness from. But to Yahweh, he forgets. Dale Ralph Davis summarizes the saying, "Because evil runs on a successful course does not mean God is not watching it. David may have Bathsheba's flesh and Uriah's blood, but he will have to face Yahweh's eyes." Doing good does not make up for our sin. And I suspect, and it's not clear in the text, I suspect one more excuse David gave was, well, I'm going to marry her. I'm going to take care of her far better than Uriah ever could. And we do this thing. So in the Roman Catholic system, there's this thing called penance. So if you do a bad thing, according to Roman Catholics, all you have to do is do enough good things to make up for it. Or maybe some people would say one good thing you do is beat yourself up. And I've done this. I have this clear memory as a junior high. I did karate for years and years. Junior high, I was still working on my skills, but junior high boys can be a bit of show-offs. So I was trying to show off how well I could punch, right? And I would try and almost hit my friends in the face, but miss them by a centimeter just to show how close I get without hitting them until I hit them in the face. And then, you know what I tried to do? I'm like, well, here, let me go buy you a soda. Oh, let me buy you lunch. Oh, let me just, you can hit me if you want to. Did any of that make up for what I had just done? No. In fact, most of them were like, I don't want to do that. Leave me alone, jerk face.
You should have just laid it down for a
I know, I should have. It was your fault. See, giving someone a chance for revenge doesn't make up for the wrong you've done, nor does trying to heap on good deeds. You can never make up for the evil that was done. And so David's forgetful thought here. He forgot what he will later repeat, we'll get there in Psalm 51, against you, Lord, and you only have I sinned. Right? He sins against Yahweh. He doesn't even think of him. As we can't make excuses. In God's eyes, wrong is wrong. Sin is sin. Nothing we do can change that. But God can change it, right? We got to keep coming back to the gospel because this is the whole message. We'll get to this in chapter 12, which is all about David's forgiveness. But we cannot overwhelm our bad with good. But God covers our bad with his blood. See, David tried to cover up his sin with more sin and with good deeds, and it didn't work. But God overwhelms our sin by sacrificing himself. He's got to remember what Matthew 1:6 is. Matthew chapter 1 is the family tree of Jesus. And who is in verse 6 but the wife of Uriah? See, sin takes many steps, these 6 steps towards sin. As David lusted, he wasn't doing what he should have been doing. He neglected his duty. He lusted with his eyes. He betrayed marriage covenant, making excuses for his sin. He then tried to hide his sin. He then murdered to cover up his sin. And then he tried to do good to make up for his sin. But chapter 12 will show us the only solution ever to throw ourselves at the mercy of God and allow him to say, yes, you have done horribly. You deserve death. But God pays the price for us. You guys, you think, what are those sins that you might commit? What are you along the path? Where have you been along the path? But God is able to forgive anyone along any part of the path because of what Jesus did on the cross. Let me pray for us, and then we'll spend a few minutes discussing